I always thought it was silly to compete with a man because he's a man and I'm a woman, and he could never play my role and I would never play his role.
What if the real crisis of our time isn't war, climate, or politics, but something older, deeper, and far more personal? Disconnection. For decades, we've tried to fix it, through technology, therapy, even isolation. But the more we search for meaning, the more fragmented we become. Then came a film. A quiet, strange film from 1983 that somehow understood it all. And behind its camera, a cast whose own secrets mirrored the story they told. Now, 4 decades later, something shocking has emerged. An insight that might change how we see ourselves. They called it a reunion, but it was really a reckoning. In 1983, The Big Chill hit theaters with a force few expected. A film about aging baby boomers gathering for a funeral and being forced to look in the mirror. But what the audience saw on screen wasn't just a scripted nostalgia trip. What was happening behind the scenes was far messier. Directed by Lawrence Kasdan, fresh off writing Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Empire Strikes Back, the film was meant to be intimate. The entire cast was brought together for weeks of rehearsals, something unheard of in Hollywood. They lived together, cooked meals together, played music together, and slowly, things started to crack. Because The Big Chill wasn't just a movie, for these actors, it became a kind of emotional therapy session. With cameras rolling, the chemistry you saw on screen, it wasn't all acting. There were actual flirtations, rivalries, and deep, buried pain that made its way into their performances. The actors weren't just playing characters mourning a friend. They were reconciling with their own disappointments. The youthful optimism of the 1960s had long since faded, and now they were being asked to resurrect it, only to watch it fall apart again. And then there was the missing presence, Alex, the dead friend, never shown on screen. What most fans don't know is that Alex was originally played by Kevin Costner. Yes, that Kevin Costner. He filmed extensive flashback scenes, including the opening where the group prepares his body for burial. But in the edit room, Kasdan cut every single frame. Costner never appeared in the film. It was devastating for him. But the truth? His absence made the film more powerful. Alex became a ghost, symbolic of everything the characters lost. It was a brutal, artistic decision, but one that Costner would later admit changed his career. Kasdan promised him another role. That role became Silverado, and from there, Costner took off. Still, the impact of The Big Chill on the cast was profound. They weren't just actors playing old friends. They became old friends, or enemies, or something in between. And that line, that thin, brittle line between fiction and reality, would haunt several of them for years. Because for Glenn Close, Kevin Kline, Tom Berenger, and the rest, it was never just a job. It was a funeral for their youth, a last dance with the idealism they once believed in. And as the camera rolled, the secrets started to surface. Secrets that would stay buried for decades, until now. Glenn Close wept in The Big Chill, a raw, cathartic scene that left audiences stunned. Her character, Sarah, was the moral center, the gentle soul grieving a lost friend and a marriage that no longer felt alive. But what few people knew was this: Glenn wasn't just acting. That breakdown scene? It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't planned, and it wasn't fake. Behind her controlled, elegant exterior, Glenn Close was carrying a grief of her own. Just months before filming began, she had suffered a devastating personal loss. The end of a relationship that had quietly defined her for years. She never spoke about it publicly, but her friends on set knew. She brought that pain with her into Sarah, and when the cameras rolled, it bled through. Lawrence Kasdan had a rule on set: rehearse everything. But when it comes time to shoot, don't fake the tears. And Glenn didn't. The sobbing scene in the bathroom wasn't acting. It was release. But Glenn's secrets went deeper than that. Raised in a cult-like religious group called Moral Rearmament, her childhood had been filled with rules, isolation, and silence. She wasn't allowed to question authority. She wasn't allowed to feel too much. Acting became her rebellion, her way of claiming herself, and The Big Chill became the mirror she didn't ask for. What fans never saw were the moments between takes. Glenn sitting alone, clutching a warm cup of coffee, staring out at the woods in quiet contemplation. She'd often break away from the group, needing silence. She wasn't cold. She was haunted. She was also fiercely protective. During filming, when tensions between cast members flared, and they often did, Glenn was the peacemaker, the one who soothed egos, who held the group together. Sarah and Glenn blurred. And then there was that scene, when Sarah tells her husband he can sleep with her best friend, just to help them both cope. It was shocking, intimate, sad, and maybe, for Glenn, a reflection of something she'd once experienced. No one ever asked, and she never volunteered. But on that set, everyone knew. She wasn't just performing. She was bleeding. He was the golden boy. Charming. Talented. Kevin Kline had just come off a Tony Award win, and The Big Chill was supposed to be his Hollywood breakout. Playing Harold, the calm, reliable businessman with a past, Kline brought an easy warmth to the screen. But off-screen, he was anything but calm. The truth is, Kevin Kline nearly walked off The Big Chill. More than once. Why? Creative control. Kline was used to theater, where actors and directors collaborate closely. But on set, he clashed with Kasdan, quietly but persistently. He felt Harold was too passive, too bland. He wanted more edge, more truth. Kasdan disagreed. He thought Harold was the anchor, and the film needed that. But Kevin Kline had another struggle too, one no one knew about at the time. Behind the charming facade was a man battling imposter syndrome. He didn't think he belonged. He'd often pull co-star Tom Berenger aside, venting about scenes he thought he'd ruined. "I'm not movie material," he once muttered, pacing the porch during a break. It didn't help that during filming, Kline was also navigating the beginnings of his relationship with Phoebe Cates, then just 19 years old. Their age difference raised eyebrows even among the cast, but Kline was deeply protective of her and kept their relationship quiet. He didn't want gossip. He didn't want a scandal. But The Big Chill gave him one anyway. There was a particular moment, a deleted scene, where Harold has a breakdown. It was raw, powerful, but it didn't fit the film's tone, and Kasdan cut it. Kline was furious. That was the scene he'd fought for, the one he believed proved Harold had depth. He didn't speak to Kasdan for days. Yet somehow, it worked. His performance, stripped of theatrics, gave the film its quiet heart. Viewers saw a steady man, but his co-stars saw the truth. A gifted actor who doubted every move, second-guessed every choice, and lived in fear of being found out. Kevin Kline walked away from The Big Chill a star. But inside, he carried the same doubts Harold did. Was any of this real? And what had he lost along the way? She wasn't supposed to be there. Not at first. Meg Tilly entered The Big Chill as a last-minute replacement after the original actress dropped out due to an injury. She was younger, less experienced, and, most noticeably, not part of the friend group. And that wasn't just her character. That was Meg, too. Chloe, the mysterious girlfriend of the deceased Alex, is the film's softest, strangest soul. She glides through the story like a ghost, too young to be part of the group's shared past, too present to ignore. And off-camera, Meg Tilly was living that same disconnect. She was the youngest in the cast by a decade. While the others reminisced about the 60s and swapped war stories from theater and film, Meg stayed quiet. She felt like a stranger. Many cast members later admitted they didn't know what to make of her. But there was more behind her quietness. Meg had secrets. Born in California but raised in Canada, she'd survived a deeply troubled childhood, marked by trauma and instability. She kept most of it private, but the pain was there, in her eyes, in the way she moved, in the way Chloe seemed always just slightly out of reach. There's one moment in the film that tells you everything. Chloe, barefoot, sits alone playing the organ. No one pays attention. She plays anyway. That wasn't scripted. Meg had been playing during a break in filming, and Kasdan told the crew to quietly start rolling. That scene made the final cut. Still, Meg's presence created friction. One cast member, never publicly named, referred to her as the tourist. It wasn't meant kindly. She wasn't one of them. But maybe that's what made her perfect. Chloe was never supposed to blend in. She was a reminder of what was lost. Of Alex's new life, the one his friends didn't understand. And Meg's distance, her emotional mystery, gave Chloe the weight of real grief. What fans didn't know was that Meg Tilly, in those quiet moments on set, was falling in love. Not with a cast member, but with the idea of a different life. A smaller life. After the film's success, Hollywood came calling. But Meg didn't want the machine. She turned down major roles, stepped away from the spotlight, and moved to the countryside. She later became a novelist, and when asked why she walked away from acting, she simply said, "I needed to heal." Meg Tilly wasn't an outsider. She was the soul the story didn't know it needed. And like Chloe, she was never meant to stay. Sam Weber was the movie star of the group, the Hollywood success story who returned home full of charm, regret, and romantic confusion. Played by Tom Berenger, he was the classic American leading man, rugged, masculine, and carrying invisible scars. And the truth? Berenger didn't have to act. At the time of filming, Tom Berenger was struggling. Despite rising fame from Platoon and looking for Mr. Goodbar, he felt boxed in. Hollywood wanted him as the action hero, the rugged lover. But Tom wanted more. And The Big Chill was supposed to be that, his way of proving he could do character work. What few people knew was that Berenger arrived on set with a drinking problem. Quiet, but persistent. The late nights, the off-camera mood swings, it all painted a picture of a man battling demons. One crew member later recalled seeing him sitting alone outside the house where they filmed, nursing a drink and staring into the trees for hours. His on-screen chemistry with JoBeth Williams felt natural, and fans believed it was acting. But those close to the production say the lines blurred. JoBeth and Tom were close. Very close. Rumors of a real-life fling followed them for years, though neither ever confirmed it. What they did confirm was the emotional intensity. "We brought things into those scenes that we didn't even know we had," JoBeth once said. Sam Weber's crisis, fame without purpose, was Tom's own. His character is the one who can't cry, who can't connect, who just wants to escape. And behind those blue eyes, Berenger was slipping into a similar numbness. After The Big Chill, his career took off again, but the man himself stayed elusive. He divorced, remarried, divorced again. Friends say he chased peace, but rarely found it. In interviews, he often downplayed The Big Chill, saying it was just a moment. But insiders knew better. It was the moment when Berenger laid himself bare. What he gave to the role, his confusion, his ego, his sadness, it wasn't acting. It was confession. She was the heartbeat of the house. JoBeth Williams played Karen, the beautiful, restless writer trapped in a life that looked perfect on paper but felt suffocating up close. Her every glance was loaded with longing. Her every word seemed to hide a question she couldn't ask out loud. And JoBeth knew exactly how that felt. At the time of filming, JoBeth Williams was one of the few cast members with a stable life. She'd already made waves in Poltergeist and was seen as a bankable star. But inside, she was restless. She'd turned down safer projects to do The Big Chill, knowing it would push her emotionally. And push it did. There was a scene, a now-deleted moment, where Karen considers cheating on her husband with Sam, Tom Berenger's character. In the script, it was supposed to go further. The original cut had a scene where the two kiss passionately and disappear into a bedroom. JoBeth refused. She didn't believe Karen would do it. Not that way. She argued with Kasdan calmly but firmly, saying the emotional weight of Karen's longing didn't need the cliché of infidelity. She fought to make the moment ambiguous, unresolved. And she won. That scene was rewritten to end in a quiet, awkward parting. It's one of the most memorable moments in the film, a decision that preserved Karen's complexity. But JoBeth's control came at a cost. On set, some cast members began to resent her influence. She was seen as too close to Kasdan, too opinionated. Kevin Kline, in particular, clashed with her during a pivotal dinner scene. The tension between Karen and Harold? That wasn't all acting. JoBeth Williams, like her character, was navigating a minefield of male egos, of expectations, of her own desires. And she emerged, not unscathed, but triumphant. After The Big Chill, she continued working in film and television, but often spoke about the emotional toll of that shoot. It was like group therapy, she once said, except no one ever turned the cameras off. Michael Gold, the smooth-talking journalist obsessed with his own fading relevance, was more than just a character for Jeff Goldblum. It was an echo. Watching him on screen, flailing to reclaim his youth and credibility, you might think the actor was hamming it up. But those who were there say Jeff wasn't performing. He was unraveling. At the time of The Big Chill, Goldblum was already known for his quirks, his stammering delivery, his lanky frame, the way he hovered on the edge of eccentric. But what most fans never knew was how tightly wound Jeff really was behind that offbeat persona. He came into the shoot with a chip on his shoulder. He felt overshadowed by Kline, Berenger, and Hurt, all theater giants with critical acclaim. Jeff was determined to stand out, so he tried everything. He rewrote parts of his own dialogue, something almost never allowed on a tightly scripted Kasdan project. He pushed for longer takes. He volunteered for extra coverage, staying late after others had wrapped. And when that wasn't enough, he started bringing his own notes to table reads, suggesting changes, not just to his scenes, but others. It didn't go over well. Meg Tilly, in particular, found his energy overwhelming. She later said in an interview that working with Jeff was like being in a room with a wind-up toy that never stops. Goldblum's constant drive to be noticed, on camera, in rehearsals, even at meals, earned him a reputation on set. Brilliant, yes, but exhausting. But there was something even deeper driving him. Off-set, Goldblum was battling anxiety. Not the vague Hollywood kind, the real, suffocating kind. He'd just come off a string of commercial flops and was worried The Big Chill might be his last shot at serious work. His public persona, a fast-talking, scene-stealing oddball, was his shield. But behind closed doors, he was unraveling from the pressure. And then came the incident. One night during filming, Goldblum disappeared from the house where the cast was staying. When he returned the next morning, he was pale, silent, and shaken. No one ever got the full story, but the whispers never stopped. Some said he'd had a panic attack. Others said he'd been confronted about his behavior by another cast member and stormed off. Whatever happened, it changed him. The performance that follows, Michael's sarcastic shell cracking, his loneliness creeping in, is arguably the most layered of Goldblum's early career. Because it wasn't entirely a performance. It was Jeff, exposed. Nick was the cynic, the wounded veteran turned drug dealer, too smart for his own good and too broken to care. It was a role that could have fallen into cliché in lesser hands. But William Hurt made him real. Too real. Because William Hurt was Nick. Hurt arrived on set like a shadow. Quiet, unreadable, intense. He refused to rehearse with the others, stayed in a separate part of the house, and insisted on remaining in character even when cameras weren't rolling. At first, the cast thought it was pretentious. But then, they started to see it. William wasn't just method acting, he was unraveling. Fresh off a painful divorce and carrying years of trauma from childhood, Hurt brought an emotional weight to the production that no one was prepared for. He didn't socialize. He didn't laugh. When asked questions during press interviews, he would stare into space before giving one-word answers. The silence wasn't an act. It was armor. During one scene, when Nick admits he can't feel anything anymore, the script called for a simple line. But Hurt broke down instead. His voice cracked. He couldn't finish the take. Kasdan called cut, but Hurt stayed seated, staring at the floor. Later, the director told an assistant, "That wasn't acting. That was something else." The crew tiptoed around him. Other actors gave him space. Only Glenn Close seemed to find a way in. The two had a deep, unspoken connection on set. No affair, no gossip, just a quiet understanding that they both carried pain they couldn't name. But Hurt's most closely guarded secret was his drug use. Not in the way Nick used drugs, carelessly, recklessly, but in a desperate attempt to stay grounded. A production assistant once found him alone in his car during a lunch break, clearly high, eyes glazed. It never made the tabloids. The studio covered it up. After The Big Chill, Hurt would go on to win an Oscar. But this film, this role, remained the closest thing he ever did to a confession. Nick's cynicism, his ache, his numbness, it wasn't a character study. It was a portrait, and William Hurt never fully escaped it. Everyone remembers The Big Chill for its iconic soundtrack, clever banter, and heartbreaking silences. But what they don't know is just how different the movie almost was. The original cut of the film ran nearly 3.5 hours. Kasdan shot dozens of scenes that never made it to the final version. Scenes that changed the tone, the relationships, and even the ending. One of the most shocking deletions, Alex's funeral. Kevin Costner's portrayal of Alex was more than a flashback. It was a narrative thread. In the original structure, the film opened with his suicide. Not with the discovery, with the act. A quiet, haunting scene showing Alex preparing for death. Costner's performance in that sequence was raw and devastating. But test audiences recoiled. The studio panicked, and Kasdan made the cut. That single decision reshaped the entire movie. Another lost moment involved Harold and Karen, the businessmen and the housewife. In one draft, they share a kiss after Karen confesses her dissatisfaction with her marriage. It was subtle, sad, and entirely out of place with the final tone. JoBeth Williams fought against it, saying it would betray her character's emotional loyalty. Kasdan eventually agreed. The scene was shot but scrapped. Then there was the group's final night together. In the version we never saw, the cast gathers for one last meal, and it's not pretty. Long-held grievances bubble up. Old betrayals surface. Michael accuses Harold of selling out. Nick attacks Sarah for never choosing sides during the Vietnam protests. It was chaos. It was real. But it wasn't the ending the studio wanted. They wanted warmth, closure, a dance in the kitchen to "Ain't Too Proud to Beg." So Kasdan chopped it all. Some of the actors were furious. Hurt reportedly refused to attend the premiere. Goldblum called the final cut emotionally sanitized. Only Klein, ever the peacemaker, publicly supported the changes. But the real tragedy? Those scenes still exist. In a vault in Sony Pictures sits the full, uncut version of The Big Chill. Never released, never shown, and likely never to be seen. They called it a film about memory, but maybe the most important memories were the ones we never got to witness. For years, fans begged for it. The idea seemed too perfect to ignore. A reunion of old friends, now older, wiser, and more scarred by life. The 20-year anniversary came and went. Then 30, then 40. Hollywood made sequels to everything, but The Big Chill remained untouched. Why? Because behind the camera, the chill never really thawed. It began with whispers after the film's release. Some of the cast stopped speaking. Others gave cryptic interviews. By the mid-90s, talk of a reunion film had already started. Kasdan reportedly had a loose treatment ready to go, with the characters reuniting once again after the death of one of their own, this time due to cancer. It would have been Karen. JoBeth Williams had even expressed interest, but nothing moved forward. Then the real trouble started. William Hurt, long seen as the dark heart of the ensemble, made it clear he wanted no part of a sequel. "What would we be doing?" he said in one rare interview. "Catching up over funerals until we all die off? That's not a story. That's just sad." Hurt had grown disillusioned with Hollywood, and many suspected he never forgave Kasdan for cutting the scenes that meant the most to him, particularly the unflinching emotional moments Nick was supposed to carry. But even beyond Hurt, the wounds ran deeper. There had been a major falling out between Glenn Close and Tom Berenger over a political clash during the early 2000s. On the surface, it was about a war, but people close to the cast said it was something far more personal. Something about how their dynamic on set never felt resolved. Berenger had always been the outsider, more TV cowboy than stage actor, and Close had once allegedly lobbied to have his role reduced. They never spoke again. Jeff Goldblum and Kevin Kline, while friendly in public, hadn't worked together since. Some said Kline had grown tired of Goldblum's constant need for attention. Others claimed it was because of what happened during that mysterious night Goldblum disappeared during filming. A night that still remains unexplained. And then there was Kasdan. The director had wanted to revisit The Big Chill for decades, but every time he tried, the cast fractured. Some refused to speak to each other. Others demanded script approval. One even wanted to direct a portion of the film themselves. In 2013, a final push was made. Sony greenlit a pitch for The Big Chill, Autumn's End. It was supposed to follow the remaining friends reuniting at Harold and Sarah's vineyard for one last goodbye. The studio even budgeted early development, but negotiations collapsed within weeks. Hurt refused again. Close pulled out. Kline didn't even respond. And then Kasdan gave up. In a 2014 interview, he said quietly, "You can't go back to a moment like that. It only exists because of who those people were at that time. Try to recreate it, and you lose the truth of it." There was no official announcement, no cancellation, just silence. In a way, the failure to reunite mirrored the film's core truth, that friendships, even the deepest ones, don't always last. That time changes people. That what binds us in youth can sometimes fade, and what's left behind is memory, not magic. So they never made a sequel, because maybe The Big Chill was never meant to be continued. It was a snapshot of who they were, and they could never be those people again. So the question remains, if The Big Chill exposed what we've all been missing, will we choose to reconnect before it's too late? Or keep drifting further apart, lost in the noise? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.